Let's check in on the heartlessness of Queensland now, and I'm joined by the LNP's health spokesperson in that state, Ros Bates, joining us from Brisbane. Ros, tell us how the government could possibly justify preventing one woman from going to her father's funeral.
Well, good evening, Chris, and there is no justification. I mean, Sarah was not a threat to anybody. Sarah needed to be with her family today, and all the Premier had to do, all Anastasia Palaszczuk had to do today was to be compassionate and consistent and show common sense, and we saw no compassion. I mean, could you imagine, as an older sister, that all you wanted to do was to be there to support your 11-year-old kid sister, hard enough that you've lost your father and that you don't have your big sister there to comfort you through a funeral. It is just despicable. How
do we go from being a sensible, pragmatic country that wants to flatten the curve of this disease to one that is so paranoid and overbearing and heartless that there's almost minimal risk, almost zero risk of any infection? She could be taken from quarantine, kept apart, and as you say, just being there at the same venue with her family, especially her younger sister.
Look, you know, Sarah had been in quarantine. She'd finished her quarantine. She was no risk to anybody. And she should have been allowed to be at her own father's funeral. And the only person who should take responsibility for her not being there to say goodbye to her father, to support her mother and her kid sister, is Anastasia Palaszczuk. The buck stops with Anastasia Palaszczuk.
So how do you fix this? We've had so many horrible decisions. People not being able to come across to see dying relatives. The expectant mother forced to fly down to Sydney for surgery and losing one of her twins. People not being able to go across the border to get back to their families from boarding school. All of this emanates from the top. How can you get Anastasia Palaszczuk to just understand that there needs to be flexibility across the state border?
Well, I think the people of Queensland will let Anastasia Palaszczuk know exactly what they think on the 31st of October. I think that, you know, we do have to keep Queenslanders safe, but we need to also show compassion. The Chief Health Officer said last week that she was the person who was making all of the decisions, and then there were so many decisions that she had to put together a team of experts. Well, that's a good thing, isn't it? But it should have happened in the first place. And you need to have nurses, doctors, psychologists, people who actually understand the medical ramifications of these applications. And you can't just ban everybody from Queensland. As the Prime Minister said today, you know, we're all Australians, and, you know, this is just another example of Anastasia Palaszczuk passing the buck to everybody else. The buck stops with her. She's the Premier of this state. She can take advice from the Chief Health Officer, but she also needs to show compassion.
But she's let the AFL and all of their entourage in. I mean, what is this?
Well, you know, unless you're rich and famous or you're an AFL team, I mean, I've got the entire entourage down in my electorate at the Mercure Hotel, swanning around via the pool and drinking at the bar, and yet we've got people like Sarah, we've got Mark here, who is another man, another Queenslander who is dying from, you know, bone cancer. He's got
can't see all of his
cancer.
Family. Just terrible.
And his kids can't even see him. Could you imagine having to choose which child is going to be there with Dad? That is just inhumane.
It is shocking. Thanks for joining us, Ros.
Thanks very much, Chris.
Ros Bates there in Queensland, in Brisbane. Just a shocking situation.